I'm Rabbi Patrick, and welcome to Kihila. Thanks for listening, everybody. I want to begin by letting you know that this is going to be a difficult podcast. We're going to talk about some things that can be very upsetting for people, including the recent mass shootings. And so I would just encourage you, if you're very sensitive to those things, to maybe skip this one. And we'll see you next time. But if not, thank you for listening. So let's begin with a premise that mass shootings are terrible. That on August 27th, 2025, the Annunciation Catholic Church, a person opened fire through the windows of the church beginning at the morning mass, killing 2 children sitting in the church pews and injuring 21 others, 18 of whom were kids. And then the shooter killed themselves. So that was a thing, right? That was day 1 of school. Those were some kids who were going to mass and then they would go to class. And instead, you have 24 people injured or dead. I was watching this little kid talk about how his friend jumped in front of him, hoping to deflect some shrapnel. And the little boy pointed his neck and he had a little black spot that looked like maybe it was some kind of like gunpowder residue, but actually it turns out it was a piece of shrapnel that got into his neck, and it's close to his carotid artery. So we're praying for that whole community, for those kids, for the grown-ups, for the church, for the school, and for that little kid who now has to have surgery because one morning someone woke up and said, "I've had enough and I want to take people out." I don't know what that is. I can't explain it and I can't understand it on a personal level. I just don't know. I don't know what the person who committed this terrible crime was thinking. I don't know what happened to them. I'm sure that more information will come out and this podcast will be dated because of that. I'm only telling you what I know. But that was one. And then, a little less than a month earlier, a shooting in Anaconda, Montana, and then a shooting in New York, and a shooting in Lexington, Kentucky, and a shooting in Chicago, Illinois, and a shooting in Tallahassee. I can keep going. That's just not even through April. Spotsylvania, not too far from us, April 8th, Shiloh, Pennsylvania, February, and in the beginning of the year, 2025, a shooting in New Orleans. Yeah. And what we do is we hear this stuff and we get mad. And we're on our phones and we're looking for all the information that we can get. Sometimes we send out messages to authorities, politicians. Maybe we just post our rage. Maybe we post a photo. We all have different responses to that. Every time something terrible happens, when you're clergy, you feel this sort of pull, like I need to say something, right? I need to send out that email. And I just got to a point after, after October 7th, where I just couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't keep sending out a message after every shooting, right? I just got to a point where I was like, how much Zurus is, am I supposed to put out to people? Like, how do you respond to that? And that's tough because you're a rabbi, right? You're in the job of that. And yet at the same time, I just couldn't do it. I couldn't send out what it would feel like a glib marketing email every time there's a tragedy. I am in the business of meaning making in a lot of ways. And meaning making can be making meaningful moments more meaningful. So, for example, this weekend, I had 2 weddings. One was on the rooftop of a condo complex, a beautiful couple that just kind of moved here to Richmond. And just a few of their family members, a small handful, kind of pop-up elopement style. The other was a big, huge interfaith wedding in DC, in Tyson's Corner. And boy, big venue, really, really cool. And in both of those, I was putting the chuppah together. So this is the thing we do now at Kehila. We'll make your ketubah, we'll build your chuppah. So you have to imagine me in this like standard issue blue suit that we all wear now with my standard issue brown leather shoes, right? And I'm like on my hands and knees putting together a chuppah and all that. That was this weekend. It's probably why, even though it was the Labor Day weekend, I'm a little bit toasted, a little bit whacked out. Um, but that's part of meaning making. You could just go to the courthouse and get something signed, but this is a meaningful moment. The sanctification of a loving relationship, that's a meaningful moment. And so you have to be there in the meaning making. And then there's the other side, which is when things happen. And you have to help make meaning out of those moments. So that's a little bit different. It's the difference between a kind of consecration, meaning you are putting Kedusha, you're putting holiness into a holy moment sort of proactively, and then something that is more reactive or responsive. And that's why when I did my previous episode about what is God, I intentionally ended on this question. What does God want from us? And why do these bad things keep happening, right? High holidays are coming up. You're so sick and tired of hearing me talk about it. I know, but it's a thing. We do this. We're in this together. We love each other. And hopefully, you're not completely annoyed by it. But I always have to tell you, you have to tell people things now 700 times so they'll hear it once because there's just too much mental traffic in the world. But it occurred to me, I'm talking about God and with this theology class here in this podcast, and then it's like, yeah, but like, so there's a God, and I'm gonna pray to that God for high holidays, and I'm gonna what? Like, to get what? To have what? What does this God want? Like, how many more Avinu Malkeinu do I have to say before a kid doesn't get killed? Right? Before we resolve the mental health problem in this country, how much more do I have to do? How many more Kol Nidres, how many Tana Tokefs, right? Who by fire, who by stoning, who by really? Is one of those kids that just was going to school, some little 8-year-old, are they on that list? Really? Well, we should talk about that. So I don't have an answer to gun violence in America. I have thoughts on it. Um, Those are political opinions. They're not theological directly. So I'm not going to give them because that's not what you're listening to. If you want to listen to me talk about public policy, well, first of all, you're not going to get much of it because it's just not something I talk about. But come find me in the tiki room when I'm off shift, when my shoes are off, when I have a cold beverage in my hand, and I'm playing a record, and it's just me and Rebbitzin. That's when you'll find the public policy conversation. Until then, what's this question before us? What does God want from us? Right? We can have the question of why do bad things happen to good people, and we're going to have that, but I'd rather start with what does God want from us and how do we know that? Because truth of the matter is we can believe in a universe that is immoral or amoral, and then we can just leave it at that. That's good enough. You could just say that that's all there is to it, that the universe is devoid of meaning unless we put meaning into it, and then call it a day. That is how you solve for the theological problem of why did this happen, right? The policy problems, the guns problem, the mental health problem, the social issues problem, that's different. But if you're just in the lane of theology, you could just say God is not present in this, bing, bang, boom. Okay, end of story. That doesn't really work. And you can start developing this complex theology of how it can work. Okay, fine. But what? Like it's a cliffhanger type of question. But what does this God want from us? What are the prayers? What are the procedures? What are the offerings? What are the sacrifices so that these things don't happen anymore? If we believe that that's how it works. And if the Bible teaches that, even if you don't believe it, or if the tradition of the Masorah teaches it through the Talmud and through the extra canonical texts, then maybe somewhere in there we're going to find it. Well, let's go on that journey together. Deuteronomy 28. Now, if you obey the Lord your God to observe faithfully all his commandments, which I enjoin upon you this day, the Lord your God will set you high above all the nations of the earth. So this is the Tevye joke from Fiddler on the Roof, where he says, God, I know that we are the chosen people, but perhaps you could choose someone else sometimes. Right, because that's kind of the theology of Deuteronomy. If you do this, then you get that. It's quid pro quo, as my lawyer friends would say. Okay, but this is only talking about the Jewish people and mitzvot. This isn't talking about everybody else, right? This isn't talking about Annunciation Catholic Church. This is just talking about what the Jews have to deal with. And do we really believe that that's how it worked out, right? The God will set you high above all the nations. Do we really want to be set high? Like, was Tevye right? Hmm, you know, I don't know. Let's keep going here. This is Amos. So this is the prophetic text. So this is something that I haven't really given you up until this point. Amos says on chapter 3, verse 2, "You alone have I singled out of all the families of the earth. That is why I call you to account for all your iniquities." Okay, this is a really interesting and important theological idea. And I heard it described this way. Just because you are chosen to do something doesn't mean you are better than. And the metaphor that I heard was, if I ask my child to take out the trash, or I tell, let's say, my child to take out the trash, I have singled them out from all the other people in this household. Of all of the Amim, all of the peoples of this house, they have been singled out, okay, to do a task, to perform something, and to do it well. And in return, they are set above, meaning that it's good job, it's attaboy, it's now that you've done this, you get that. Or it is your responsibility to do this thing, and you will forever be thought of as the person who has the glory of taking out the trash, right? As the person who keeps this home clean. And when I write about you in the future, I will say, "You alone have I singled out, keeping this household clean, making sure that the kitchen doesn't smell. You are a righteous person." Right? Okay, a little bit glib, a little bit crazy, but you get the idea. Just because you're chosen doesn't mean you're perfect, doesn't mean you're better. It means you're special in a particular way. And also, it doesn't mean that other people aren't chosen to do other things. If I ask my son to take out the trash, that doesn't mean that he has the sole responsibility of keeping the home clean, right? I have my responsibilities, Rebbitzin has hers. Okay. So we look at Amos, and he talks about, I've singled you out, and that's why I'm calling you to account for your iniquities. So if I say to someone, I chose you to do this project because I really believe in you. And that's why, because you failed at this project, I kind of have to call you out a little, right? I kind of have to sit down with you and say, what happened here? Because I really believed in you. That's a little bit of the theology here. Now, that's pretty intense, right? Of all of the human beings on earth, this tiny group of people living in the Levant are the ones who are chosen to fulfill this mission of bringing Torah to the world, right? Well, yeah, we did it. And that means that when we're called on our iniquities, our areas of harm that we cause, right? Or the ways in which we don't live in divine connection. It would make sense, because if you're given a big task, you have a big responsibility. Okay, this is the this is the Spider-Man, the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man, right? With great power comes great responsibility, and it's a huge power to be a light unto the nations. But that also is a responsibility, and that also means that when you don't live up to that responsibility, there's going to be some kind of reckoning. Okay. So, it doesn't really give us a lot of meaning, but let's keep going. So, this is the Talmud Bava Metzia. This is folio 59b. Rabbi Eliezer went and said, "If the law is like me, from heaven they shall prove it." Okay, so let me back up a little bit. So this is a story called the Oven of Aknai. And so you need to imagine all of these rabbis kind of broing down with each other. And they're trying to figure out whether or not an oven is kosher. And they're arguing and arguing and arguing. And let me tell you something, rabbis love to argue about everything all the time. They overthink everything all the time. So they're having that moment. Certain things don't change in life, let's just say. So they're having this debate. And so Rabbi Eliezer decides to start invoking God. So he says, "If the law is like me, from heaven they will prove it." A heavenly voice came out and said, "What have you with Rabbi Eliezer, who the law is like him in every place?" So Rabbi Eliezer is making his argument. Big old voice in the sky says, "But Rabbi Eliezer is right all the time. So, like, what's your problem, guys?" Right? So we have this story where in theory, you don't have divine voices and stuff like that. That's more of a Bible thing. Prophecy ended, but we have this stuff going on. Okay. So Rabbi Yehoshua does the coolest thing. He stands up and he says, quoting Deuteronomy, the Torah is not in heaven. So you have to imagine the chutzpah here, right? Of like the heavenly voices coming out. And this rabbi's like, yeah, but you know what? Torah's not in heaven. Like you said that. And so we're just not going to follow that. We're not interested in that. And Rabbi Yirmiyah said that the Torah was already given at Sinai. We do not pay attention to a heavenly voice since you already wrote at Sinai in the Torah after the majority to incline. Okay, so this is a little bit confusing. So this is about jurisprudence and the question of how do we decide what Torah law is going to be on a case by case basis? You can have a general law about something. We see this in the US. You have a general law, okay, and the law gets interpreted. It gets interpreted by courts. So here we have this situation where basically this rabbi is saying, look, we don't need the heavenly voice every time we have a problem because the Torah is not in heaven. We wouldn't follow it anyway. And on top of that, we have this idea of the majority to incline, which I talked about a little bit in another podcast episode. So what is being said in this moment is we already have how this is supposed to work, which is we all kind of get a vote and we vote basically on halakha. We vote on Jewish law, and that's how we make these decisions. So you've given us God, Torah, and then the book is sealed. That's the end of the story. We have the law and we're going to interpret it. And whoever's the most learned and can make the best point is going to be whoever we follow. Okay. So then there's this sort of epilogue to the story where Rabbi Natan meets the prophet Elijah. And okay, so Elijah is the prophet whenever the Messiah is supposed to come. That's when you're supposed to see the prophet Elijah. And Elijah never died. So Elijah, that's Eliyahu. So if you sing the song Eliyahu HaNavi, you've probably heard that before. That's who we're talking about. So Rabbi Natan meets the prophet Elijah, like you do. And basically he says, hey, that time that we were all arguing about the oven, what did God say in that moment? So Elijah said, well, that God said, my sons have defeated me. So how wild is that, right? My sons have defeated me. Okay. In other words, God's like, yeah, no, I got owned. I got served. Like I set up the law the way it is, and they're right. And my intervention is not going to do anything, right? It's meaningless in this moment. Woof. Okay. So what are they trying to say here? What they're saying is that the universe as it is what it is. We can't rely upon miracles to solve our problems. We have the law, okay? We have Torah, we have the law, and we've been granted this capacity to think about what law is and to interpret it. So sometimes you'll hear people say, well, you're interpreting it your own way. You're going against the tradition. No, the tradition is trying to figure it out. Now, after the majority to incline, meaning that, okay, breaking away and doing all these little, miniature groups and whatever. Yeah. So maybe that's a problem. And maybe we can do a class on the different Jewish movements and how they justified kind of breaking away and doing their own thing. Orthodox rabbis would say that that's problematic. Other kinds of rabbis would interpret these things in different ways and say that the interpretation allows for this. But more importantly, all of this is in our hands. All of it. So, no matter what theology you have, what does God want from us? To be active participants in this world, to be co creators in this world. It is not about life happening at us. It's not about hoping and praying that miracles will happen. It is that we live our lives and we do the best we can and we operate with what we have. And what we have is Torah, which is a great thing to have. It is a great inheritance to have. And that we should look to Torah and then make the decisions from there. And that is the value. We do not wait for the miracle. We hope for it, certainly. That's great. But we live this life here, right now. We are partners with God. In this line from the book Finding God, page 76, it says, "By bettering ourselves, we can fix the universe and return it to its original wholeness." This is a Kabbalistic idea. This tikkun, this mending, can be accomplished by observing the laws and commandments of the Torah. By doing mitzvot, we can free the imprisoned divine lights, raise them to their proper places, and restore the world. So that's it. That's the idea. Do the best we can with what we have. Eric Fromm, who was a humanist, but very much a Jew, said, "The imitation of God by acting the way God acts means becoming more and more like God. It means at the same time knowing God." So perhaps it's not about God as a noun. It's not about the voice from heaven. It's about God within, a God who we can become more like. Right? We are to be godly. And the more godly we are, the more we know God. So it's a practice. I've talked about this before, right? We don't call it spiritual perfection. We call it spiritual practices. And that's what it is. The imitation of God by acting like God helps us to know God better. And so that's what God wants from us. And yet, we have a little bit of a problem. We do all these God things and we get to know God more, and still we live in a universe that doesn't seem to make sense. Proverbs 10:28 says, "The righteous can look forward to joy, but the hope of the wicked is doomed." Okay, that's pretty straightforward. The more, godlike we are, the more divine energy we put out in the universe, the happier, the more joyful we are, the more simcha we have. Quite literally, that's the word. And yet, I think it's true that there are people who are really bad and they have joy too. And plenty of very good people experience doom. So maybe when we look at some of these verses, we don't look at them as the explanation of everything, right? We don't take Proverbs and we put it above everything and say that this explains it. No, that doesn't work. How many kids were looking forward to going back to school? And then we're doomed, right? That just doesn't work. So Jeremiah, great prophet, he makes this argument, chapter 12, verse 1. "You will win, O Lord, if I make claim against you. Yet I shall present charges against you. Why does the way of the wicked prosper? Why are the workers of treachery at ease?" Because this is true too, right? Like you live a decent life. You see people live a decent life, and yet it seems like some of the crummiest people are doing pretty darn well. And there's a certain kind of bargain that some people make where they look at the world the way it is and they say, "You know what? Fine. This is just the way it's designed. Why am I trying to be righteous? Why am I trying to do everything right? Why am I trying to be a good person?" And they just do what they've got to do to survive. And so they get involved in things they shouldn't be getting involved in. They do stuff they shouldn't do. And this is a normal human thing, but sometimes it gets real dark. This is a kind of nihilism, a belief that it all sucks. And so who cares? And this is what we saw the other day when children were killed. This idea of who cares. Dark, deep nihilism, which frankly, I'm seeing a lot of. Thank God we have Kehila. Thank God we have Kehila Cares. We're here to help people. We're here to do the right thing. But you look at the broader culture, and yeah, there are a lot of people who look out at the world and they have this problem that Jeremiah has. They see the wicked doing pretty darn well. And they see the righteous not doing well. Now, maybe in some cases, these people who have these problems, maybe they're actually not all that righteous. Maybe this is just sort of like these incels, right? Or some of these other people, it's the proverbial guy in his mom's basement who complains about everything all the time. This is the character in Catcher in the Rye who thinks that the normies are just so awful, right? So maybe it's, Maybe it's not that there's all these righteous people out there observing this and then they become bad, right? Maybe it does require a little bit of introspection to figure out where your faults are. In other words, when you're pointing the finger at someone, there's three fingers pointing back at you. And there's different versions of that proverb throughout Judaism, actually. Um, but yeah, so Rabbi Yanai in Pirkei Avot, which is a really excellent section of Talmud. It's a really kind of easy one to get through if you're new to Talmud. But he says this. He says, "We don't have the ability to explain the success of the wicked or the suffering of the righteous." And honestly, like that's been a quote I've been thinking a lot about. I want to have it somewhere in my office here because Rabbi Yanai is being honest. We don't have the ability to explain the success of the wicked or the suffering of the righteous. Now we can explain it in human terms. We can explain it in sort of the world that we live in, but when we think about it theologically, okay, that's where it gets to be a bit of a nightmare. Mishnah Sanhedrin starts to get into this idea of the world to come. Because maybe one of the theologies could be, well, it stinks here, it's not perfect here, but something good's going to happen later. And then that makes up for it. So the theology of like the afterlife, the world to come, is a bit of a reaction to the reality of what we have here, of an imperfect world. So Mishnah Sanhedrin says, all Jews have a share in the world to come, as it says, and this is quoting the prophet Isaiah, thy people are all righteous, they shall inherit the land forever, the branch of my planting, the work of my hands, that I may be glorified. Okay, so that's nice. These are those who have no share in the world to come. One who says that the belief in the resurrection of the dead is not from the Torah. So, okay. So now we're getting into this question of the Pharisees and the Sadduceic way of thinking of things, right? The rabbis were the ones who get to take the ball and run with it after the year 70 and the destruction of the temple. So these are their beliefs. Resurrection of the dead. One who says that the Torah is not from heaven. Okay. So in other words, the divine nature of the Torah. And one who denigrates the Torah, does not have the world to come. Okay, so those three ideas. But then we have some add ons. So Rabbi Akiva says also one who reads outside books. In other words, someone who's looking at the extra canonical texts that are not part of our tradition and saying that's Judaism. So that's one. And he also adds, and one who whispers an incantation over a wound. And so this is witchcraft of some kinds. Abba Shaul adds another one, and he says also one who utters the divine name as it's spelled. So in other words, someone who denigrates God's name through saying it, right? Because there was this sort of blanket ruling that if you didn't want to take God's name in vain, right? If you didn't want to say God's name incorrectly, then perhaps the best thing you can do is just not say God's name at all. So a blanket prohibition on pronouncing Yud He Vav He, which is why you hear people say Adonai, Lord, Yah, et cetera, Hashem, the name. Okay, so, but what do we do with any of that? These are people who are trying to figure it out, okay? Because you have Rabbi Akiva, Abba Shaul, right? You have all of these people who are adding these other ideas, right? Of who could possibly be in the world to come or be rejected from the world to come. So, to be honest, they don't really know. They're using their understanding of religious wisdom to try to come up with an answer here. And even they're not sure. So they have this idea of a world to come, Olam Haba, but they don't exactly know 100% who's in and who's out. So I think this is actually a very spiritually meaningful thing, that even the rabbis of the Talmud, the inheritors of early Judaism, who are bringing Judaism into this world and to future generations forever and ever and ever until Olam Haba, don't even know themselves, right? In theory, in a lot of religions, there's this idea that if you go farther back, you get to source, you get to the origin story, you get to the original wise people, or you get closer to the myth, you get closer to the moment of realization, actualization, revelation. And that the farther away you get from that chronologically, perhaps the more watered down things are. Now, in Judaism, we'd say actually it gets better because you have different people over time who help to kind of clarify and shape and bring Judaism into the next stage of the world. So maybe that's not perfect for us, but it's still something that we tend to go back to. I think of, so my great grandmother, who I never got to know, was a Pentecostal type person. And there's this song in the South called Give Me That Old Time Religion. And there's some of that. It's sort of this false nostalgia that people have. And they do it even thinking about Judaism, right? Remember when we all lived in the Lower East Side and we all kept kosher and we all celebrated Shabbos and it's like that wasn't true. That didn't really happen. That's this shtetl-itis that some people have. That wasn't real. Like that's not the way that worked. Most of our Jewish literature is about failing to live up to things as opposed to actually living up to them. And so anyway, so if you go back, let's go back to the kind of give me that old time religion stuff. If you go all the way back here and you're talking about the Mishnah, right? The central idea is in Talmud, and they're trying to figure it out. They're kind of adding some ideas in and trying to for this big question of like who's going to be in Olam Haba. That means they didn't know. They were doing the best they could with what they had. And what that sets up is a premise for us, which is you do the best with what you have. And that ultimately, on some level, Rabbi Yanai is the one who wins this question. We don't have the ability to explain the success of the wicked or the suffering of the righteous, at least not spiritually. We can explain it materially. Ultimately, at the end of the day, though, we go back to the righteous can look forward to joy. So there is a joy there somewhere. Somewhere we'll be able to find joy. We just don't know 100% how. I don't believe in a God who makes relationships just to destroy them. And if anything, everything in the universe is a relationship. Every part of your body is in relationship to another part. You go all the way down to the cellular level. There's a relationship there of the different parts of your cells. You go to the subatomic level. We have these electrons that just appear and disappear based on who's watching them, right? They pop in and out of existence, so to speak. Another way of looking at it is they travel every distance except one. Okay. So it's all a mystery, and we're part of that. And that's a miraculous and incredible thing. Terms and conditions apply. Sometimes the person gets the gun and the children get killed, and it's wrong. And we do what we can to help who we can, even when we feel like there's nothing we can do. My own personal theology is this: that God made an amoral universe, not an immoral universe, not a universe that's just plagued with evil, right? And is nothing more, where there is no righteousness, there is no goodness. Some people do believe that, right? This kind of dark, nihilistic thing. I don't believe that. I believe in a God who made a universe that's neither wholly good nor wholly bad. It just operates. It is what it is. It's based on, what Spinoza said, right? That it's just kind of the divine nature. Okay? And all things are conditioned, you know, by the necessity of the divine nature, meaning we need God in this universe or to make this universe or to be in relationship to this universe. An ingredient, we might say. A godless universe is not a thing, right? The divine nature is what we have to work with. Okay, but what's the outcome of that? In order for us to be fully human, we have to live in a universe that is consistent, right? So there's this book called Arrival, and they actually made a movie about it. It's the weird alien movie where like they're the heptapods, and they do this thing where they like spit this ink or something like that, and it spells their language. It's a weird movie. It's also a great movie, but this book that it's based in, there's a chapter where it talks about a collection of short stories that are unrelated to each other, but there's this one that it presumes a world where God is making all of these miracles happen, but also God is judging and punishing people. And so you have these situations where like angels will just suddenly appear, or like people will fall into the earth, like Karach, and be set on fire, or you'll be walking around a shopping mall and you'll look down and you'll see hell. It's this really weird book, a really weird short story. But one of the jokes kind of in it, one of the puns, is that insurance companies have to insure against what they call acts of God, which are these weird miracles that people experience. The blind suddenly can see, or people are stricken with, some sort of illness, things like that. So we don't live in that universe. We live in a universe that is constant. Okay. So yes, there's so much mystery to how that happens, and quantum mechanics and all of this other big stuff. But at the end of the day, we know that when the bad guy gets the gun and the trigger is pulled, that the bullet's going to go whichever way it's pointed. It doesn't hit the unrighteous person as a judgment. It might hit the righteous person who's just trying to go to school, you know. And also, sometimes crummy people win the lottery. Um, Sometimes righteous people live these wonderful lives and suddenly something bad happens to them, you know? And there's other people who live really great lives and it just doesn't seem like they have any worries in the world, and that's just the way it works for them. And then there's other people who are terrible and they can never cut a break. And so they're, incarcerated or unhoused or something like that. And we look at those people and we go, "Oh, no, no, see, that's how that works. Proverbs is right. Terrible people, terrible things." Right. It's a mix. Balagan, the word for sort of like falling apart, uh rick, rickety, messy, confusing. Yeah, that's just kind of how this is. So, what does a God who creates this kind of universe want from us? I would say to be the moral agents. It is our job to live moral lives and to make the world better. And if God wants to come and bring a Messiah who's going to solve everything from there, great. And if not, still got us. In an amoral universe, we need to look to something moral. And if we've been given moral agency, or what I would call, being made in God's image, then Eric Fromm was right. The idea is that the more divine we live, the more connected to the divine we are, and the more we understand God. And that's not a bad thing. So I would encourage you out of this, lean into God. Specifically, lean into God as a verb. Lean into godliness. We live in an amoral universe. We live in a universe where just because of the way the laws of nature is, bad things can happen to good people, good things can happen to bad people, good things can happen to good people, and bad things can happen to bad people. And some of it is just kind of meh, everyday stuff. Sometimes you're just taking out the trash, sometimes you're just paying taxes, right? It just kind of is what it is. Most of life is fairly mundane. But you have this opportunity to do something incredibly special. You can take that divine God energy, whatever you want to call it, and you can put it out into the world. And here's the thing, nothing bad's going to happen because of that. Nothing bad's going to happen if you smile at the cashier. You know how sometimes they ask you, how are you? And it's just like it's an instinctive thing. They've done it 300,000 times that day. Hi, how are you? Hi, how's it going? How'd you get everything you need? Right? That there's nothing to stop you from saying, "I'm doing great. How are you?" Just make it a conversation. Just a very quick one. The number of times that I've done that and someone has looked at me and very sincerely said, like, "Thank you for asking." Right? Because they're just doing their job. Yeah. Or maybe you could, if you're kind of like, if you're kind of like me and you sort of just like to do stuff like this, and they say, "Fine," like, "How's your day?" Like, "Fine." You'd say, "Well, what do you have to look forward to today?" Right? Or, "Sounds like your shift has been a lot." Yeah. Maybe you just make a friend there for just a moment, just a brief moment, and then you move on. It doesn't hurt. Doesn't hurt to be kind. Doesn't hurt to be generous. Doesn't hurt to make people smile. You might be the highlight of someone's day. Think about it. You don't know what's going on with them. You don't know what's going to happen. But wouldn't it be great if they left their job saying, like, that last customer, yeah, they put a smile on my face. Yeah, they were good. Hey, maybe things are going to be all right after all. And yeah, there's nothing we can do to kind of make that person's day perfect, but just those little tiny moments, Those little moments where you see some trash, you pick it up because you don't want to live in a world that's gross. You smile at someone to help them to have a good day because you don't want to live in a world that's unfriendly. You take that extra step, you help that coworker, you watch that kid, whatever. Yeah, because you want to live in a world where people care about each other. One way of looking at it. The rabbis wondered what Olam Haba was like and who gets to be in it. Maybe we live our lives like we're already there. So, does Olam Haba, is it designed to be somewhere where scarcity is the number one concern? Right? Is Olam Haba a place where we, aren't good to our spouses? Is Olam Haba the kind of place where we steal from each other? Is Olam Haba the kind of world where there is no justice? I don't think so. I don't think that's how they perceived it, at least. So why don't we just live like we have that now? Why don't we live as though we're in the world to come and we do the things and we have the practices that we're supposed to have? And yeah, we're still going to live in an amoral universe. Nothing we can do about that. But maybe in the world to come, there is no disease. So let's focus on curing some diseases. Maybe in Olam Haba, there isn't scarcity. So let's maybe work on helping people to get better jobs, better training, better educations, better housing. Because, yeah, in the world to come, we don't have that. What if it's all right here, right now, and we're empowered to make it better? That's the Messianic era. And that's an era we can live in right now. Thank you so much. God bless. Quick note here, friends. It's about 3 weeks before high holidays, and we have already sold half our tickets for Erev Rosh Hashanah and for Kol Nidre. The evening events are the more popular events because those are the times when people can get off of work and things like that traditionally. So I wanted to offer some ideas here for people who have different kinds of schedules and different family needs. I promise this is quick, but I just want you to know what we think might be the best options for you. So if you cannot take the day off, you need to get there right after work and you kind of want some dinner before you go home. Definitely, you're going to want the Rosh Hashanah evening service and the Yom Kippur concluding service, which has a break fast as well. Those are the tickets that are sold halfway already, so you need to grab those. If you're retired, if you want something during the day, we have Rosh Hashanah day, we have the morning service, no night driving, which is fantastic. What if you're a family with kids? Your kids do not want to sit for more than 15 minutes. I get it. That's the kind of family situation you got. You need super kid friendly things. And also, let's save you from having to make dinner. So, Jewish High Holidays pop up at Art Factory includes PJ Library, includes food and music and art activities and story time. This is great and it's free. So we hope you'll come to that. That's between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And of course, if you just want something right at the end, if you just want something that you can bring your family to and say, we did it, right? It wasn't just the cool party, but it was really a service. Yom Kippur concluding services. Again, these evening ones are the ones that are about 50% sold. So you need to grab those if you want them. If you're someone who's not really into davening, if prayer is not where you are, of course you could come to the High Holidays party, but also the Shabbat Shuvah dinner at the rabbi's. That's me. I'm going to be cooking a big meal. I just came from the kosher grocery store in Silver Spring, Maryland to get stuff. Totally excited about it. About half those tickets have sold because, again, evening stuff always sells faster. It is a fun family environment with great people. So it's not just for adults. We'd love to have your kids. So definitely come if you're more into the food and the culture aspect of this and not so much the prayer aspect. Now, on the opposite end, if you are someone who is seeking deep spiritual connection, I'm going to tell you, Yom Kippur is what you're in it for. Those Kol Nidre, the Yom Kippur morning service, and the Yom Kippur concluding service. Just going ahead, make Yom Kippur your thing. Rosh Hashanah, you'll have your fun, you'll have your apples and honey, all that good stuff, but Yom Kippur, that's what you're in it for. If you have any questions, rabbi@rabbipatrick.com, or you can go on kahilarva.org. But make sure to get those tickets. I know it's tempting to wait till the last second, but we don't want anyone feeling sad and left out. So thank you so much.